I still remember the silence that fell over my grandfather's living room that night. You could hear a pin drop as my father's words hung in the air like poison. "You're nothing but a failure, Eliza. Always have been." 27 years old. And there I was, being torn apart at a family dinner like I was still a child bringing home a bad report card. But what happened next changed everything. Not just for me, but for our entire family. My grandfather, who'd barely spoken 3 sentences all evening, slowly pushed back his chair, stood up, and said something that left everyone at that table completely stunned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to the beginning. 3 weeks before that fateful dinner, I'd lost my job at the marketing firm where I'd worked for 4 years. The company had been acquired by a larger corporation, and my entire department was deemed redundant. It wasn't personal, at least. That's what HR kept saying as they handed me my severance package. But losing your livelihood never feels impersonal, does it? I hadn't told my family yet. Not my parents, at least. My mother would worry herself sick, and my father, well, Richard. Blackwood had never been one to offer comfort. He'd built his accounting practice from nothing after coming from a poor family, and in his mind, success was simply a matter of working hard enough. Failure meant you hadn't tried hard enough. It was that simple to him. My grandfather, on the other hand, Dad's father, was cut from entirely different cloth. Charles Blackwood had worked the same factory job for 40 years, saved every penny, and raised 3 children in a modest home, filled with more love than luxury. He never had much, but he gave everything. When I called him that morning, voice cracking as I explained about the job, he simply said, "Come for dinner on Sunday, all of you." By all of you, he meant my parents, my younger brother Alex and his wife May, and me. Sunday dinners at Grandpa's had become rare since Grandma passed 2 years ago. The invitation felt like an anchor in a stormy sea. "I can't face Dad right now," I admitted. There was a pause on the line before Grandpa spoke. "Some things need facing, Lizzie. Trust me on this one." I should mention that my relationship with my father had always been complicated. Growing up, nothing I did ever seemed to measure up. When I made honor roll, he'd ask why I didn't have straight A's. When I got into college, a good one, with a partial scholarship, he questioned why I hadn't aimed for an Ivy League school. My career choice in marketing was frivolous compared to something solid like finance or law. Alex had it even worse in some ways. He'd chosen to become a teacher, which Dad considered a waste of potential. The only thing that had somewhat redeemed my brother in Dad's eyes was marrying May, a brilliant surgeon. Even then, Dad's pride seemed more about having a doctor in the family than my brother's happiness. Sunday arrived with that peculiar dread that only family obligations can inspire. I parked my car, the same reliable sedan I'd driven for 8 years, behind my father's gleaming new luxury SUV and took a deep breath. Grandpa's house looked the same as always, modest brick with meticulously maintained flower beds that Grandma had planted decades ago, and Grandpa still tended with devotion. Alex and May arrived moments after I did. My brother gave me a bear hug that nearly lifted me off my feet. "Missed you, sis," he said, stepping back to look at me. "You look tired." "Gee, thanks," I replied with a weak smile. But there was no heat in it. Alex had always been perceptive. May squeezed my hand. "Everything okay?" I nodded quickly, too quickly. "Fine, just work stuff." The lie tasted bitter. Before they could press further, the front door opened and there stood Grandpa, looking smaller than I remembered yet somehow radiating the same strength he always had. At 78, his once broad shoulders had begun to stoop slightly, but his eyes remained sharp and kind beneath bushy white eyebrows. "There's my kids," he said warmly, opening his arms. Inside, Mom was already helping in the kitchen, a space that still held Grandma's touch in every corner, from the hand-stitched curtains to the collection of mismatched mugs accumulated over decades. Dad stood by the fireplace, scotch in hand, scrolling through something on his phone. "Elizabeth," he acknowledged without looking up. Not Eliza or Lizzie, always the formal Elizabeth, as if keeping me at arm's length through extra syllables. "Hi, Dad," I replied, wondering for the 1,000th time what it would take to thaw the perpetual winter between us. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Grandpa had prepared Grandma's famous pot roast, not quite the same, he admitted, but made with the same recipe and love. We talked about safe topics: the unseasonably warm spring, Alex's 5th grade class and their science fair projects, May's hospital getting new equipment. Then Dad, swirling his second scotch, asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, Elizabeth, how's that promotion looking? The one to senior manager you mentioned last time?" The room didn't actually go silent, but it felt like it did to me. My fork paused halfway to my mouth as I scrambled for an answer that wouldn't open. The floodgates. There's been some changes at work, actually. Dad's eyes narrowed slightly. He had an uncanny ability to detect weakness, like a predator sensing injured prey. "What kind of changes?" I set my fork down, appetite vanishing. "The company was acquired. Stellar Marketing doesn't exist anymore." "And?" Dad pressed. "And my position was eliminated." The words felt like stones in my mouth. "Along with my entire department." Mom gasped softly. "Oh, honey. When?" 3 weeks ago. I couldn't meet anyone's eyes. 3 weeks? Dad's voice had that dangerous quiet to it. "And you're just telling us now?" I looked up then. I was processing it myself, looking for new opportunities. "Found. Any." The challenge in his tone was unmistakable. "Not yet," I admitted. "It's a tough market right now." Dad let out a derisive sound, something between a scoff and a laugh. "A tough market for those without drive, maybe." "Richard," Mom murmured in warning. But Dad was just getting started. "What have you been doing for 3 weeks? Sitting around feeling sorry for yourself?" He didn't wait for my answer. "This is what happens when you choose a career with no stability. I told you marketing was risky. Should have listened when I suggested accounting." I didn't choose to. "Be laid off, Dad," I said, heat rising to my face. "No, but you chose a field where this kind of thing happens. And I'm guessing you haven't saved much, have you? Always spending on those trips and dinners out I see on your social media." Each word hit like a physical blow. The worst part was, there was a grain of truth there. I hadn't saved as much as I should have. But did that justify this public dissection of my choices? "I have savings," I defended, though not as much as I'd need if my unemployment stretched much longer. "Enough for what? A month? 2? Dad shook his head. 27 years old and starting over from scratch. This is what happens when you prioritize following your passion over practical decisions. Alex jumped in. "Come on, Dad. The entire company was acquired. How is that Eliza's fault?" Dad turned his critical gaze to my brother. "A valuable employee doesn't get eliminated, Alexander. They get retained or promoted during acquisitions." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. May stared at her plate. Mom fidgeted with her napkin. Alex's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. "I'm valuable," I said quietly, almost to myself. "What was that?" Dad leaned forward. Something in me snapped. Years of seeking approval, of measuring my worth through my father's impossible standards. It all came bubbling to the surface. I said, "I'm valuable," I repeated louder this time. I was good at my job, really good. The acquisition had nothing to do with performance. It was about streamlining operations. Dad waved this away. "There's always a reason they let people go. The best ones stay." That's not always how corporate America works, Richard, Grandpa interjected mildly. It was the first time he'd spoken since we'd started eating. Dad barely acknowledged him. Let's be honest, Elizabeth. This isn't the first time you've fallen short, is it? Remember that internship in college you didn't get? The scholarship that only covered part of your tuition? That promotion last year that went to someone else? Each example was a carefully selected arrow from his quiver of my past disappointments. I felt myself shrinking in my chair. You've always aimed for mediocrity and achieved exactly that, Dad continued, his voice taking on the lecturing tone I knew all too well. You've never pushed beyond your comfort zone, never really challenged yourself. And now, look where you are, unemployed and unprepared. The room spun slightly. I felt 16 again, standing in his study with a report card that had 1 B+ among the A's, watching his face darken with disappointment. That's not fair, I whispered. Life isn't fair, Dad shot back. The sooner you accept that and stop making excuses, the sooner you might actually accomplish something worthwhile. Richard, that's enough, Mom said, more forcefully this time. But Dad was on a roll now, years of stored criticisms finding their release. You know what your problem is? You lack resilience. You've always given up when things get hard. Remember, that piano you begged for? Quit after 6 months. The soccer team? Quit. That novel you were supposedly writing? Never finished. You're nothing but a failure, Eliza. Always have been. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. My eyes burned with unshed tears that I refused to let fall. Not here. Not now. Not in front of him. Alex half rose from his chair, fury etched across his features. But before he could speak, we all heard the sound of Grandpa's chair scraping against the hardwood floor as he slowly stood up. What happened? Next will stay with me for the rest of my life. Grandpa didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When Charles Blackwood spoke, people listened, a quality my father had inherited but never quite mastered with the same grace. Your mother would be ashamed of you right now, Richard, Grandpa said, his voice steady and clear. The raw statement fell like a thunderclap. Dad's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. In our family, Grandma's memory was sacred. To invoke her disapproval was the nuclear option. Excuse me? Dad sputtered. You heard me. Grandpa reached for his wallet, which was sitting on the side table. With deliberate movements, he opened it and pulled out a worn, faded photograph. He placed it on the table and slid it toward my father. Do. You know what this is? Grandpa asked. Dad glanced at it dismissively. It's my college graduation. Look closer. Something in Grandpa's tone made us all lean in. The photo showed a much younger version of my father in cap and gown, beaming with pride between Grandpa and Grandma. This picture was taken exactly 3 months after I lost my job of 27 years at the factory, Grandpa said quietly. 3 months after I was let go with a handshake and a cheap watch for nearly 3 decades of loyalty. I stared at Grandpa in shock. This was a story I'd never heard before. Your mother and I had put aside every extra penny for 15 years to pay for your education, Grandpa continued. When the factory closed, I had exactly 2 months of savings left, not enough for your final semester. Dad's expression changed. Subtly. This was clearly news to him as well. How did you... he began. I worked 3 jobs, Grandpa said simply. Night security at the mall, morning shifts at the gas station, weekend landscaping for anyone who'd hire me. Your mother took in typing and mending. We ate beans and rice for months, sold our car, but we made sure you finished that accounting degree. The silence that followed was profound. I could see my father processing this information, something shifting behind his eyes. You never told me? Dad finally said. You never asked, Grandpa replied. You were so focused on your studies, on building your future, as you should have been. We didn't want you distracted by our struggles. He tapped the photo with one gnarled finger. That smile on my face, that's not just pride in you, son. That's relief. Relief that our sacrifice meant something, that you would never know what it felt like to be deemed redundant after giving your life to a company. Grandpa turned to look at me then, his eyes soft with understanding. Until today, I thought you'd learned the most important lesson I tried to teach you, that a person's worth isn't measured by their paycheck or their title. Then he did something I'd never seen before. Grandpa removed his wallet and took out every photo he carried, faded snapshots of all of us through the years. He arranged them on the table like playing cards. There was Alex at his college graduation, me at my first art show in middle school, Dad receiving his first business award, Mom in her garden, family vacations, Christmas mornings, ordinary moments made extraordinary through love. Not a single one of these pictures was taken because of a job title or a bank statement, Grandpa said. They're here because these were moments of connection, of joy, of family. That's the success that matters, Richard. And by that measure, your daughter is extraordinarily successful. He fixed my father with a steady gaze. She is kind. She calls me twice a week just to chat. When your mother was sick, Elizabeth came every weekend to read to her. She's built friendships that have lasted decades. She donates her time at the animal shelter. She's loved and respected by people whose opinions should matter. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks now, unable to hold them back in the face of Grandpa's unexpected defense. Being laid off doesn't make her a failure, Grandpa continued. How she responds to it might reveal her character. But so far, all I see is a young woman dealing with a setback with more grace than you're showing right now. Dad's face had gone through a remarkable transformation during Grandpa's speech, from anger to shock to something that looked almost like shame. Grandpa gathered his photos and carefully returned them to his wallet. Then he did the most unexpected thing of all. He walked to the coat closet, removed his jacket, and put it on. "Where are you going?" Mom asked, alarmed. "Home with my granddaughter," Grandpa replied. "I believe she could use some actual support, right now." He looked at me. "If that's all right with you, Lizzie?" Dumbfounded, I nodded. "Dad," my father began, but Grandpa held up a hand. "I've said what needed saying, Richard. What happens next is up to you." He turned to the rest of the table. "Thank you all for coming. There's apple pie in the kitchen if anyone wants it." And with that, my 78-year-old grandfather walked out of his own dinner party, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence. I found my voice first. "I should go with him." I stood on shaky legs, avoiding my father's eyes. "Eliza?" "Wait," Dad said, his voice different now, uncertain. I paused at the doorway. He started, then stopped, seeming genuinely at a loss for words, perhaps for the first time in his life. In that moment, standing on the threshold between the dining room and the hallway, I realized something profound. My father's approval had been the currency I'd traded my self-worth for all these years. And just like any currency, it could be devalued in an instant by forces beyond my control. "I'll call you tomorrow, Dad," I said quietly, and followed my grandfather out the door. Outside, the spring evening was cool and fragrant with lilacs. Grandpa was waiting by my car, his weathered face peaceful under the streetlight. "You didn't have to do that," I told him. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Yes, I did. Been waiting 30 years to say some of those things." "You really worked 3 jobs to put Dad through college?" Grandpa nodded. "Your grandmother worked even harder, nearly killed us both. But we did it because that's what family does. They lift each other up when one falls." Dad doesn't seem to see it that way. Your father forgot some important lessons along the way. Grandpa sighed. Success changed him, made him forget where he came from. He patted my shoulder. "But he's not a bad man, Lizzie. Just lost his way a bit." I unlocked my car, processing everything that had happened. Where to, Grandpa? Really want me to take you home? He chuckled. Actually, I'm starving. Didn't get to finish my dinner with all that dramatic exiting. How about that 24-hour diner you like? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Milkshakes at 9 p.m.? What would Dad say about such an irresponsible decision? He'd say we're both failures, Grandpa replied with a wink. And right now, I can't think of better company to fail with. As we drove away from the house, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Dad was standing on Grandpa's porch, watching us leave, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. For the first time, I wondered what it must have been like for him, growing up with parents who sacrificed everything for his success. The weight of that expectation, the pressure to justify their hardship. It didn't excuse his behavior, but maybe it explained it. He'll come around, Grandpa said, following my gaze. Your father's got a lot of his mother in him, though he'd hate to admit it. Stubborn as a mule, but with a good heart underneath it all. I hope you're right. I usually am, he replied with the serene confidence of someone who'd seen enough of life to know its patterns. Now, about that milkshake, I'm thinking chocolate malt, and maybe some of those disco fries you're always raving about. As we pulled away, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Dad's words had cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had scarred over long ago. But Grandpa's unexpected stand had changed something fundamental in our family dynamic. Lines had been drawn, truths had been spoken, old stories had come to light. What I didn't know then was that our late-night diner run was just the beginning. The real story, the one that would ultimately transform not just my relationship with my father, but my entire understanding of success, failure, and family, was about to unfold in ways none of us could have predicted. And it all started with one elderly man finding the courage to stand up and walk out of his own dinner party. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The diner was nearly empty when Grandpa and I arrived. Just a few night shift workers grabbing coffee and a couple of college students hunched over laptops in the corner booth. We slid into a worn red vinyl booth by the window, and I immediately felt myself relax in the familiar surroundings. This place had been my refuge during college when I needed to study away from noisy roommates. And later, when adulting got too overwhelming and I needed comfort food and bottomless coffee, Grandpa said, studying the laminated menu he surely had memorized by now. Your grandmother and I had our first date in a place a lot like this. Not as many neon lights, but the same feeling. Really? I thought you met at a dance. He smiled at the memory. Met at a dance, yes. But our first real date was at Miller's Diner on 8th Street. Long gone now. I was so nervous I spilled my entire chocolate malt in her lap. I laughed, trying to picture my always composed grandfather as a fumbling young man. What did she do? Laughed, then took my napkin, cleaned herself up as best she could, and said, Well, I guess you owe me another date now to make up for this one. His eyes twinkled. Smartest thing that ever happened to me, spilling that drink? The waitress came by, Doreen, who'd been working here since I was in college, and took our order. A chocolate malt for Grandpa, strawberry for me, and a large disco fries to share. You doing okay, Charles? She asked Grandpa, who was apparently a regular here too, a fact I hadn't known. Haven't seen you on a Sunday night before. Just having a little adventure with my granddaughter, he replied warmly. After she left, I studied my grandfather across the table. There was so much I didn't know about him, I realized. So many stories I'd never asked to hear. How come you never told any of us about losing your job before Dad graduated? I asked. Grandpa shrugged. Never seemed important to the story. Your father succeeded. That was what mattered. But it is important, I insisted. It's everything. It's why he is the way he is, isn't it? He thinks success only comes through sacrifice and struggle. Grandpa considered this. Partly. But it's more complicated than that. Your father was always driven even as a boy. First one up in the morning, last one to quit working. When he was 9, he built a little stand and sold lemonade all summer to buy himself a bicycle. Most kids would have asked their parents, but not Richard. He wanted to earn it himself. Sounds like Dad, I said. The problem came when he got older and realized we couldn't give him what some of his friends had. College was going to be a stretch for us, even before the factory closed. I think, Grandpa paused, choosing his words carefully. I think he came to see our financial situation as a failure on my part. He decided very young that he would never be in the position I was in. Our milkshakes arrived, piled high with whipped cream. I took a sip, letting the sweet coldness contrast with the heaviness of our conversation. He doesn't see it as a failure now, does he? I asked. After what you told him tonight? I don't know, Grandpa admitted. This is the first time I've ever told him the whole story. Your grandmother didn't want him to know how bad things got. She was so proud, your grandma. Didn't want charity. Didn't want pity. Especially not from her own son. I tried to imagine keeping such a significant struggle hidden from my family and couldn't. But then again, wasn't that exactly what I'd done these past 3 weeks? I didn't tell anyone about losing my job because I was ashamed, I confessed. I didn't want Dad to look at me exactly the way he ended up looking at me tonight. Grandpa reached across the table and patted my hand. I know, sweetheart, and that's on him, not you. A parent's job is to build their child up, not tear them down. But you didn't tear Dad down, and look how he turned out, successful, driven. Successful by some measures, Grandpa agreed. But I wonder sometimes if I did him a disservice by not teaching him that success isn't just about money and achievement. That's on me. Our disco fries arrived, crispy golden fries smothered in brown gravy and melted cheese, the ultimate comfort, food. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. So what happens now? I finally asked. Dad's never going to forgive me for walking out like that. Forgive you? Grandpa raised his bushy eyebrows. Lizzie, you're not the one who needs forgiveness here. You know what I mean? He'll see it as disrespect. Probably, Grandpa agreed. But sometimes a little disruption is necessary. Systems don't change without pressure. I stared at him. Since when did you become a revolutionary? He chuckled. I've had a lot of time to read since your grandma passed. You'd be surprised what they stock at the senior center library. His expression grew more serious. Look, your father loves you. I know that doesn't always feel true when he's criticizing you, but he does. He just has a broken way of showing it. By calling me a failure? By pushing you to be what he thinks is best for you, Grandpa corrected gently. It's misguided and hurtful, but in his mind, he's helping. I absently swirled a fry in the remaining gravy. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't, Grandpa agreed. Which is why I said what I said tonight. Some cycles need breaking. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from Alex. Dad left. Mom's upset. Call me when you can. I showed it to Grandpa, who nodded thoughtfully. Your brother's a good man. Takes after his sister that way. Despite everything, I smiled. I've missed this, talking to you like this. We should do it more often. Well, I'm not planning on going anywhere soon, but I'm not getting any younger either. He winked. Don't wait for another family crisis to have milkshakes with your old grandpa. We finished our late-night feast, paid the bill, I insisted over Grandpa's protests, and I drove him back to his house. The lights were all off. Everyone had gone home. You sure you'll be okay here alone? I asked as I walked him to his door. He gave me a look that was pure Charles Blackwood, a mix of amusement and stubbornness. Been managing on my own for 2 years now? Think I can handle one more night. I hugged him tightly, breathing in his familiar scent of aftershave and peppermint. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. Nothing to thank me for, he replied. Just spoke the truth as I see it. As I drove home to my apartment, I felt emotionally drained but somehow lighter. Something had shifted tonight, in my family, in my relationship with my father, and most importantly, in how I saw myself. Yes, I had lost my job. Yes, finding a new one in this economy wouldn't be easy. But I wasn't a failure. A setback wasn't the same as failing. And even if I did fail at something, so what? Failure was just part of being human. I was halfway home when my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. Dad's name appeared on the dashboard screen. My heart lurched, and for a wild moment I considered not answering. But Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Systems don't change without pressure. I took a deep breath and pressed the answer button. Hello? Elizabeth. My father's voice sounded different, subdued, almost uncertain. Is Grandpa with you? I took him home, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. He's fine. A pause. Good. That's good. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never been able to say to each other. Dad! I began at the same moment he said, I shouldn't have. We both stopped. You go ahead, I said. I heard him exhale heavily. I shouldn't have said those things. About you being a failure. That was wrong of me. An apology. From Richard Blackwood. If I hadn't been driving, I might have fallen over from shock. Thank you for saying that, I replied carefully. Another pause. Your grandfather. The things he said. About working 3 jobs. About his factory. Did you know any of that? No. It was all news to me, too. 40 years, Dad murmured. Almost. To himself. I never knew. I waited, sensing he had more to say. I need some time to process all this, he finally continued. But I want you to know that He trailed off, and I could almost feel him struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. I'm proud of the person you are, Elizabeth. Your grandfather's right about that much. You are kind, and that does matter. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I blinked rapidly to clear them. This wasn't a full reconciliation, not by a long shot. But it was a crack in the wall that had stood between us for as long as I could remember. Thank you, Dad, I said softly. That means a lot. We'll talk more soon, he promised. Get home safe. After we hung up, I drove the rest of the way home, in a daze, replaying the events of the evening. By the time I reached my apartment, I was exhausted, but also oddly energized. I kicked off my shoes and sank onto my couch, pulling out my phone to call Alex and fill him in on everything. But before I could dial, a text from an unknown number came through. Hi Eliza, this is Maya from Horizon Digital. Sorry for the late message, but I just reviewed your portfolio and was really impressed. I know we met briefly at the networking event last week, but I'd love to discuss a potential opening we have that might be perfect for your skill set. Can we set up a coffee meeting this week? I stared at the text in disbelief. Maya Rodriguez was the creative director at one of the most innovative digital marketing agencies in the city, a place I'd dreamed of working but assumed was out of my league. We had indeed met at a networking event where I'd given her my card more out of optimism than expectation. Sometimes, it seemed, the universe had a sense of timing. I started typing a response, a smile spreading across my face. Whatever happened, with this opportunity, whether it worked out or not, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't a failure. I was just a person navigating life's unpredictable currents as best I could. And for tonight, that knowledge was enough. What I didn't realize then was that this evening, this dinner gone wrong and its aftermath, would be just the first domino in a series of events that would fundamentally change my family forever. The real story was just beginning, and it would lead us all to places we never expected to go. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.